nations can't take care of their people, what do we do?
I don't think this is right to say nations can't take care of all their people. I think that we have to say that the people who are in charge of the nations maintain they cannot take care of all their people, and we should just tell them we'll go back and make some more plans, try again. Because if we don't adopt that attitude, then we'll end up encouraging nations to become parasitic, and that's a bad road to go down.
Do you have a situation where there are just some nations or some people that might not be able to be brought up to the same standard of living as the United States?
The question of whether other nations can be brought up to our standard of living, I think, is the wrong one to ask, because it looks as though our standard of living is so high that if all the people of the world tried to live at that level right now, it just couldn't be done. Two things I think are going to have to happen. I think Americans will, whether they like it or not, have to lower their standard of living some, and the other is some of the other nations can raise it some, but I don't think they'll be able to raise it to what is, at the present time, the average American standard of living.
What would be the standard of living?
Well, you'd have to put this on a quantitative basis, but the standard of living certainly does not include 2 or 3 cars for every family, for all the families in the world. This is impossible. Of course, some of the reasons that we have these 2 or 3 cars is because we've done a lousy job of planning our cities, which haven't planned, they've just grown like topsy. If we had decent transportation systems in cities, most families could do with 1 car, and many of them could do with no cars. But that's because we've allowed things to get out of control. In other words, this business of 2 or 3 cars per family is not just a matter of wealth, it's a matter of waste that we don't, in many cases, don't even get much enjoyment out of.
You've advocated some interesting positions about how people should deal with these problems, such as the tragedy of the commons.
What I meant when I wrote The Tragedy of the Commons was to call people's attention to the fact that the problem of dividing the resources has to be done in a way that fits in with human nature. We shouldn't expect too much of it. The expectation which you find in the Marxist ideal, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs, we know does not work. The 70-year experiment in Russia certainly showed that it does not work, and many experiments in this country shows that it cannot work. And the reason it doesn't work is just because of human nature. This is the wrong standard to have. Instead, it should be from each according to his work that he does, and to each according to the degree to which he's earned what he gets. And if you put it on that basis, then people will work and try to earn it. Whereas if you say you are entitled to it, no matter how useless you are, you're entitled just because you're a human being, you encourage incompetence. And this is a bad thing to do. This is just elementary knowledge of human nature that people have had for thousands of years, but which for a complex of reasons we sort of forgot about in the last 100 years or so.
Human beings seem to have evolved to handle immediate crises, not these long-term, unforeseen, and difficult-to-see crises that technology has presented. It seems as though we haven't evolved from the state of being able to tackle the bear at the cave door to the radioactive waste dumps that we have now.
Well, it's certainly true that we do a poor job with dealing with dangers that aren't obvious and immediate. I suppose all one can say is this is a matter of education. People have to understand, for example, what radioactivity is, understand why it's dangerous, understand what measures you can take, and realize that you're not going to feel this intuitively, that you can stand near a block of plutonium and you have no immediate feeling that you're in danger, but you are. And you have to believe the figures and the measurements and so on and act accordingly.
Are new religious belief systems necessary?
Well, I don't know. There's enough in many of the old religions, if properly interpreted, to do what we need to do. All the religions have some concern with posterity, with being a good guardian of the riches of this generation for the future generation. We need to emphasize that re-emphasize it, so to speak. But that's not a new invention, that's just a re-emphasis of something we've always known.
perhaps the scientists should be emphasizing the hazards and dangers and negative costs as well as all the wonderful benefits and positive costs.
The negative costs do need to be emphasized by scientists, and I think they are. But the trouble is that people do seek ways of forgetting that or repressing the knowledge. And people who are in the business of selling things will constantly try to build up in you an attitude of indifference to the future. You know, there was a number of years ago, there was a motto, fly now, pay later. Well, you see, somebody who's in business loves that. In other words, don't pay for it now, charge it. You can pay it next year. Well, this is a bad thing to emphasize. We used to emphasize thrift. I mean, 150 years ago, say public education emphasized the importance of thrift. I don't know, I'm not in elementary education, but I dare say they don't emphasize thrift there now, because if they did, if we really emphasize this to our children, I think we'd have all the merchants in the community down on us. They'd say, stop that. People have canceled their credit cards. We can't stay in business if you do that. We've got to have people spend foolishly.
There are so many different aspects of this problem of overpopulation that we really don't have time to cover them all. Is there any way you can sum up for us how we could take specific action to tackle this problem?
The basic thing to remember when we're talking about moving people to do the right thing is that you have to make it worth their while. In other words, set up a reward system and make sure the reward system rewards for the correct behavior. And if the nation generally is convinced that we do not need an increase in growth of population, the first thing to do is to remove the incentives to have more children, or semi-incentives, such as the deduction you get on your income tax. See, this goes for every child you have, no matter how many you have. Well, if we really think that it's probably not good for a family to have more than 2 children, we should stop those incentives after the second child. In other words, the first 2 children, maybe you do get a deduction, but not for number 3 and not for number 4. And if things look really bad, we might even start fining people for having number 5, number 6, number 7.
Should family planning be available to everyone who wants it?
Oh, certainly, but that's just a matter of information. And we should always be in favor, in a democracy, of everybody having all the information. That's what family planning does. Gives you the information. Says, we'll tell you how to avoid having children if you don't want to have any more. But whether you have them or not depends on the reward system. If you're rewarded for having children, even though you know how not to, you'll have children. Whereas if you know you're not going to be rewarded in lower taxes, then maybe you'll stop. Use the family planning information that's available.